This quote coming from Jack Torrance sounds like a warning about other men. He describes violence as if it exists somewhere outside him, treating it as though it is something that belongs to a different, lesser kind of person, someone who is more corrupt than himself. Now, for decades, one of the most common questions around Jack Torrance is if the hotel drives him mad or if the darkness comes from within. And people, myself included, are drawn to the debate because, well, everybody finds reassurance in their own perspectives. If the hotel is responsible, then Jack himself is a tragic hero, to an extent. However, if Jack is the culprit, then he is a mere mortal. Now, after reading Stephen King's The Shining, I keep coming back to the same uncomfortable feeling. The hotel matters, definitely, yes, but Jack arrives in both stories, which is The Shining the novel and Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, with the ball already rolling. He comes with a history, with a habit of telling his own story in ways that always seem to make room for an excuse. And that is why Kubrick's version is jarringly effective. Stanley Kubrick doesn't invent Jack's darkness. If anything, he just stops pretending it's a surprise. Stephen King's version, though, offers a different kind of horror. It unfolds slowly through the excuses that Jack repeats until they begin to sound like the truth. You don't just witness the monster, you watch the monster being made. And worse, you watch him choose it. Hey everyone, I'm Nikanak, and I make videos about everything I question and overthink, and today we're talking about the house that Jack Torrance built. Now, a quick side note before we move on, just so we're all on the same page here, I'm using Stanley Kubrick's Jack Torrance as the main Jack for this character analysis, but I will be using Stephen King's novel as supporting evidence, especially for Jack's backstory and the patterns that explain his behavior in the film. So without further ado, let's get into it.
And his temper, same thing. All his life he had been trying unsuccessfully to control it.
Jack's childhood is built around a contradiction he never really reconciles with and overcomes. He loves his father, and his father hurts him anyway. Jack remembers being 7 years old when his father reddened Jack's behind, and then blacked his eye. The way Jack remembered it felt like just another day.
He could remember himself at 7, spanked by a neighbor lady for playing with matches. He had gone out and hurled a rock at a passing car. His father had seen that, and he had descended on little Jackie, roaring. He had reddened Jack's behind, and then blacked his eye.
What follows this memory reveals how Jack learns to handle anger. After this incident, his father goes back inside the house, and Jack simply passes the violence along.
And when his father had gone into the house, muttering, to see what was on television, Jack had come upon a stray dog and had kicked it into the gutter.
The violence does not stop with him, it continues in a different direction, and Jack learns early that pain moves from those who hold power to those who don't. The Torrance household itself reinforces this understanding. Jack remembers that it had not seemed strange for his father to win arguments by the use of his fists. Violence becomes part of the family structure, and fear and affection coexist, shaping how Jack understands love. He recalls that his own love should go hand in hand with his fear, a pairing that basically sets the foundation for everything he would become. Now, this pattern shows up again in Jack's memories of the elevator game. Being lifted into the air brings excitement, but the same motions carry the risk of injury when his father is drunk. And once again, this joy and this fear, they exist side by side, and Jackie learns to expect both at the same time. The defining moment, however, in Jack's childhood occurs when his father beats his mother with a cane. The memory lingers not only because of the brutality of the act itself, but because of the language used during it.
Now, by Christ, I guess you'll take your medicine now, goddamn puppy, whelp. Come on and take your medicine.
So on top of all of this, Jack grows up with the idea that violence can count as discipline. Meanwhile, his mother's response, or lack of any response, had a lasting impact too. He remembers that she rarely spoke above a mutter, a detail that makes her a secondary figure in the household, and that silence, that passivity, her being so withdrawn from the situation, became especially important after the beating, when Jack's father claims she fell down the stairs. Her glasses flew across the house and into the gravy or mash. Instead of the 7 hits with the cane he gave her, his mother corroborates that story while sitting in the hospital and holding the hand of a priest. And unfortunately, on that day, Jack learns a pretty brutal lesson. He realizes that in his family, violence doesn't get confronted, ever, and it's made into an excuse. And if you want to make it through the night, well, you have to keep your mouth shut. And later in the novel, Jack remembers loving his father uncritically and strongly. Despite the spankings, the black and blues, the occasional black eye, Jack had to distort his concept of love to survive his father's violence. So, only naturally, by the time he reaches adulthood, Jack's outlook on life is already largely shaped by his childhood experiences. Love still feels unpredictable, authority is tied to physical power, and anger, well, it looks for a way out. And when Jack has a family of his own, the pattern is still very much there. But he's no longer on the receiving end. No. He stepped into his father's role. And even though he wants to be a good father, that ingrained, maybe even hereditary urge becomes something he has to keep a grip on, minute by minute inside his own house. And that's where the drinking comes in.
He now thought that part of his drinking problem had stemmed from an unconscious desire to be free of Stovington, and the security he felt was stifling whatever creative urge he had. He had stopped drinking, but the need to be free had been just as great.
That need to be free sounds reasonable until you see what free looks like for him. Benders, rage, and near disasters. Because he isn't drinking for fun, he's drinking to get out. And once he's out, he turns dangerous. And before Jack ever breaks Danny's arm, there's already a moment that shows what alcohol does to him inside the home.
But he hadn't been home until 4 a.m, stumbling and mumbling his way up the stairs, waking Danny up when he came in. He had tried to soothe the baby, then dropped him on the floor.
And although he isn't deliberately trying to hurt Danny here, he's still drunk and he's still careless, and that's enough to do damage. I'm not saying anything happened of that, but I'm also saying it's not impossible that Danny might have cracked his skull. And even then, Jack holds on to a certain self-image. He wants to believe he's still a good person underneath everything.
And yet, through it all, he hadn't felt like a son of a bitch. He hadn't felt mean. He had always regarded himself as Jack Torrance, a really nice guy who was just going to have to learn how to cope with his temper someday before it got him in trouble. The same way he was going to have to learn how to cope with his drinking. But he had been an emotional alcoholic just as surely as he had been a physical one. The two of them were no doubt tied together somewhere deep inside him, where you'd just as soon not look.
And this is one of the clearest explanations Jack ever gives of himself. He doesn't think of himself as abusive. He thinks of himself as a nice guy with a problem he'll just deal with someday. It's not a big deal. But that one word buys him time. It pushes the responsibility down the road and lets him keep repeating the same cycle. But it's one thing to talk about a bad temper, and it's another thing to see what it actually does. And for Jack, the theory turned into a nightmare the day Danny spilled that beer.
When Danny was 3.5, he spilled some beer on a bunch of papers I was working on. Papers I was shuffling around anyway. And shit. His voice broke, but his eyes remained dry and unflinching. It sounds so goddamn beastly said out loud. I broke his arm, turning him around to spank him.
What did amuse me here, though, is that it's not just the violence that occurred, is that this is one of the only times I think. Jack refuses to hide behind an excuse. He's actually brutally honest because he won't let himself call it an accident, and he even cuts Wendy off when she tries to protect him.
Of course not, Wendy said hotly. Jack didn't mean... No, Wendy, Jack said. I meant to do it. I guess someplace inside I really did mean to do that to him, or something even worse.
And it boils down to that this admission matters because it strips away Jack's nice guy facade, since he isn't just afraid of losing control, but openly admits he meant to hurt someone. And once that is said, his history of childhood trauma becomes more apparent, revealing how violence became a coping mechanism, discipline a justification for abuse, and how love and harm can coexist. And then there's the bicycle, a situation that I'm really surprised doesn't get talked enough about.
It had been a little past midnight. Jack and Al were coming into Barrie on US 31. They were both very drunk. The Martians had landed that night in force. They came around the last curve before the bridge at 70, and there was a kid's bike in the road. A moment later he heard the final dreadful smash as it landed on the road behind them. Something thumped underneath them as the tires passed over it. The Jag drifted around broadside, Al still jockeying the wheel, and from far away Jack heard himself saying, "Jesus, Al! We ran him down, I felt it."
Now this matters because it shows how far Jack's drinking can go. And while there's no clear proof they actually killed anyone, but that possibility of it might have happening rattles him so much that it's stuck with him, and what follows is pure panic, searching in the dark, second-guessing everything, and eventually quitting drinking after it. But old habits die hard, and when he goes after George Hatfield, the kid who was slashing his tires at the school that Jack was teaching at, the words he says while beating this child up come out like he's repeating something he learned a long, long time ago.
"All right, George. If that's how you want it, just come here and take your medicine."
So having grown up with violence and discipline as a normal part of life, Jack naturally falls back onto these patterns. Sure, quitting alcohol changes things on the surface, but that deep-seated reaction is still there. And while his drinking is a problem, the bigger issue is the story Jack tells about himself. He's the talented writer and responsible provider, so anytime he gets cruel, it's stress or pressure, and underneath it all, he's convinced he's owed a bigger life than the one he has.
Have to use your brain. The celebrated Jack Torrance brain. Aren't you the fellow who once was going to live by his wits? Jack Torrance, best-selling author. Jack Torrance, acclaimed playwright and winner of the New York Critics Circle Award. John Torrance, man of letters, esteemed thinker. Winner of the Pulitzer Prize at 70 for his trenchant book of memoirs, My Life in the 20th Century.
The point isn't that Jack wants to write, it's that he needs greatness to make his suffering feel worth it. And when that payoff never comes, he starts viewing the world like it's against him. So even living by your wits sounds like he thinks everyone and everything is out to get him.
Living by your wits is always knowing where the wasps are,
which just makes him feel cornered and misunderstood. And once Jack buys into this story about himself, he needs someone to blame, and Wendy becomes the villain. He begins treating her like a rival to his authority and his mission. In his head, her concerns become sabotage, and he starts acting like they're the problem for not seeing how hard he's trying.
What it really came down to, he supposed, was their lack of trust in him. Their failure to believe that he knew what was best for them, and how to get it. His wife had tried to usurp him. She had turned his boy against him, tried to kill him with a bottle, and then had locked him, of all places, in the goddamned fucking pantry.
And this shift in perspective is extremely telling. Jack reframes their marital tension into a paranoid conspiracy where he takes on the rational role, and Wendy plays the saboteur, using Danny, for lack of a better word, as a pawn. This distortion has a purpose. Jack's ego needs an enemy. By inventing a villain, he can retreat into the safety of a misunderstood victim. But that anger goes far beyond Wendy and Danny, because Jack is openly envious of the people who seem to coast through life on looks, charm, and connections. The George Hatfields of the world with their movie star faces, effortless grace, and futures already waiting for them.
What could he possibly know about George Hatfield that would make him hate him? That his whole future lay ahead of him? That he looked a little bit like Robert Redford, and all conversation among the girls stopped when he did a double gainer from the pool diving board? That he played soccer and baseball with a natural, unlearned grace?
Then there's the Al Shockleys of the world. Al is Jack's rich, powerful drinking buddy, the guy who was in the car during the bicycle accident. But while Al had the money and the family name to clean up his act and stay respectable, Jack didn't. So when Al calls to warn Jack about not writing about the Overlook, Jack doesn't see it as a friendly heads up. He sees it as proof that the system protects people like Al while leaving common folk like him on the outside. But underneath all that blame, there's something Jack wants even more.
And in the dark, his eyes open, Danny thought, he wants to be one of them and live forever. That's what he wants.
And the Overlook, well, it is more than happy to feed that want. So now that we've already laid out what kind of man Jack is, the Overlook doesn't need to corrupt him so much as isolate him. Press on the sore spots and then repeat back the exact story he wants to believe about himself, which is why Jack's initial reaction in the novel is, surprisingly, one of comfort, overriding the more expected emotion of fear.
Nothing in the Overlook frightened him. He felt that he and it were simpatico.
And this is said even after he's seen enough to know something in this place isn't right. And I believe Kubrick captures the same seduction in a uglier way when Jack tells Danny, almost tenderly, that he loves the hotel and wishes they could stay.
Forever and ever and ever.
And I believe the fantasy here isn't the escape. The fantasy is permanence. A place where he gets to feel chosen and right and important and without anyone interrupting him. And once Wendy pushes back with concern for Danny, Kubrick traps us in Jack's voice as he turns responsibility into a club, demanding attention, admiration, obedience, until he stops sounding like a worried father and starts building this case for an unapologetic self-interest. And the book shows this power dynamic escalating when Jack begins to assert his right to own and choose things for himself.
Damn you both. I know what you want, but you're not going to get it. This hotel, it's mine. It's me they want. Me. Now, you'll find out who is the boss around here. You'll see. It's not you they want. It's me. Me.
Which is exactly, in my opinion, where Grady's line acts as the final turn of the key, sealing Jack's faith within a cage he helped build.
You've always been the caretaker.
This quote most people take as either a literal time loop reincarnation idea or a broader the hotel repeats the same man in different bodies. But I think it reads like the cruelest offer possible because Jack, throughout the whole story, wants greatness. Grady hands him a job title that sounds like status, then sweetens it up with a little ladder.
Think how much further you yourself could go in the Overlook's organizational structure. Perhaps, in time, to the very top. Really? Jack whispered.
And then turns that promotion into an ultimatum.
But that's really up to your son to decide, isn't it? Grady asked.
And Jack eats it up because power is what he's been craving all along.
Up to Danny. Jack frowned at Grady. No, of course not. I wouldn't allow my son to make decisions concerning my career. Not at all. What do you take me for?
So when Stanley Kubrick says in an interview that Jack comes to the hotel psychologically prepared to do its bidding and that the paranormal is real within the story, he's confirming exactly what we've seen. The Overlook doesn't have to start from scratch. It doesn't invent Jack's worst impulses. It recognizes them, it definitely flatters them, and hands them a role big enough to kill for. So Jack Torrance doesn't fall apart because the Overlook is powerful. He falls apart because it knows exactly what to give him. And Stephen King's version of the story is intimate in a way that can feel uncomfortable. We are placed inside Jack's head, listening as he explains himself, reframes his anger, and slowly convinces himself that his worst impulses make sense. And I just recently found this out, that this isn't accidental. King writes Jack as someone shaped by addiction because to a degree he has struggled with those same ghosts. The novel shows us clearly how an addict thinks, how responsibility turns into resentment, how guilt turns into self-pity, and how blame always finds somewhere else to land. While Stanley Kubrick's version keeps us outside. We don't hear Jack reason his way forward nearly as much. We watch him, we sit in rooms with him, we listen to him talk at people rather than with them. And I believe that the horror in the film comes from proximity because it shows us what it's like to live with someone whose addiction and anger are already in the room. And neither version excuses Jack, but they ask different things of the audience. Stephen King asks us to understand how someone becomes this way, and Stanley Kubrick asks us to endure what it feels like to be trapped with him. And together they complete the picture. And whether you're inside his head or standing across the room from him, the result is the same. But what about you? What do you think was Jack Torrance's real downfall? The Overlook, the addiction, or the story he told himself? Let me know in the comments down below. And also, let me know if you would like to see a video about Wendy. And if you're still here, thank you so much for watching. And now remember, the important thing is to never ever 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 stop questioning. Even me. Till next time.